These statistics are concerning. Why are more people leaving the armed forces with an increase of over 14%? And why has recruitment fallen by over 23%? I figured I'd ask my Instagram followers what they thought, and as expected, many people have their opinions on the matter. So let's talk about it. Hey everyone, and welcome to The Savvy Squaddy. In this video I'm going to talk about some of the reasons why, as suggested by some of you, there are more people leaving the UK Armed Forces than actually joining. Before diving into the main discussion, it's important to acknowledge that the reasons people leave the Armed Forces prematurely are subjective. These reasons are influenced by personal circumstances, opinions, experiences, and vary from person to person. For instance, the Armed Forces Continuous Attitude Survey 2022 reveals that 40% of respondents disagree with the fairness of their pay. While this may be true for those individuals, it's worth noting that 41% believe they are fairly compensated and 19% remain neutral. So who is right? Well, they all could be, as it's down to the individual and their circumstances. I want to emphasise that when I play devil's advocate and present counterpoints, it doesn't mean I'm dismissing the reasons people have for leaving. Those reasons likely play a significant role, but by offering alternative perspectives, I aim to provide context, broaden perspectives, and enhance understanding, allowing you to make better informed decisions. Creating an echo chamber where everyone agrees wouldn't be productive. While I may agree partially or fully with some of these points raised, I will intentionally play devil's advocate to present valid counterpoints. Life is rarely black or white, and the issue of pay is simply not shit. This video will be lengthy, and apart from a few charts and images of responses, there won't be much visual content, so feel free to listen while performing some mundane tasks. Now, it's important to note that my sample size is not extensive and does not represent the entire armed forces. However, here is a breakdown of responses I received. 34.4% mentioned inadequate pay, 20.5% attributed it to a reduction in and lack of incentives, 18.2% pointed to poor management and leadership, 12.9% cited work-life balance as a factor, 10.7% mentioned workload, and the remaining 3.3% included various other reasons. Here is a chart from the AFCAS 2022 showing the factors for leaving and staying and their percentages. I will share my thoughts on each factor raised by your answers, provide valuable information for consideration, share anecdotes and stories, and perhaps upset some of you by challenging some preconceived notions. My goal is to equip you with the knowledge to make informed decisions in the future. While you may agree or disagree with my points, I encourage you to share your perspective in the comments below. I don't want this to be an echo chamber where repetitive points are exchanged and agreement is the norm. Productivity lies in constructive discussions, so if you believe the pay is shit, please constructively explain your reasoning. Right, let's get into it. So 34% of responses were on the subject of pay and money. Now, in the interest of transparency, I fall into the category of the 41% of the AFCAS who agree we are paid fairly. When everything is taken into account, the compensation is quite generous. Just watch my video where I go through how much I would have to earn on Civvy Street to keep living the same lifestyle I do now. Spoiler alert, it's an extra 20k a year. The likelihood of me leaving the military and immediately finding a job that pays a comparable salary is currently quite low. If I were to leave, my family and I would have to make adjustments to our lifestyle, as we wouldn't be able to sustain it in the same way. However, it's important to recognise that this perspective is subjective. Not everyone is in the same position as me. Many individuals may have more children, own a house, and not benefit as much from the subsidised benefits offered by the military, which make them feel underpaid. Now, don't get me wrong, I would love to be paid more, and there are certainly times where I think to myself I'm not getting paid enough to do this. But I've also had plenty of times where I think to myself, I can't believe I'm getting paid to do this. So, whilst I don't dismay the pay argument as a factor for people leaving, as it is indeed a valid concern for some individuals based on their circumstances, I do take issue with singlies who live in the block with no dependents and no other financial obligations who say, "Oh well, the pay's shit, ain't it?" These individuals have minimal expenses, with the monthly accommodation charge for junior ranks being around £80. They don't have to pay for utilities and their rooms come fully furnished. The rest of their pay is essentially disposable income to be used as they wish. Now, some people will comment and complain about the state of some of the accommodation, and it is true that some of it is certainly not the most desirable place to live, but that is not the point I'm getting at. I am merely stating that those living in the block, who are single with no dependents, will have much more disposable income than those who do not. When it comes to assessing pay, many people fail to consider the standard of living that their salary allows. It's important to bear in mind that the income required to attain a certain standard of living depends on the size and composition of the household. For example, two individuals who earn the same salary will have different standards of living if one is single and the other has a family, which I do hope makes sense. You can find out where you lie on the UK income distribution and how many people are better or worse off than you by using this handy guide that I will link below. So for example, in my one income, 2 adult household with one child under 14, I have a higher income than 31% of the UK population. Therefore, I have a better standard of living than nearly a third of the population. However, a corporal with the same income as me but single, no dependents, no other financial obligations and living in the block has a higher income than around 76% of the UK population. So, whilst his salary may be the same as mine, he's able to have a much higher standard of living than me due to his lack of dependents. In fact, he's able to have a much better standard of living than over 3/4 of the UK's population. I want to clarify that this is not a complaint but merely an observation. I of course should not be paid more because I made the choice to have a family and move out of the block. It's natural that individuals without financial responsibilities will be better off than those who do. However, I hope this example highlights the significant difference in the living standards that your salary allows compared to others in the UK. Now let's consider young individuals who join the military straight out of school without any prior job experience. A brand new private just out of training, single, no dependents, living in the block, has a higher income than nearly 50% of the UK population, and that is with a starting salary of £21,425. Let's be real for a minute. There are very few jobs someone with no experience or unique skills can walk into and be better off than nearly half of the population of the UK. And yet, there are so many young individuals who think the pay is shit. They don't even have anything to compare it to as they haven't even had a civvy job or experienced that side of life. And for the sake of comparison, a similar private who is married but their partner does not work, with 2 kids living in service family accommodation, is better off than only 3% of the UK population, which is certainly where people will find that their pay is not sufficient if they are in this sort of situation. So lads, don't go marrying the first woman you match on Tinder and knock her up because you want to live that pad life. It's not worth it. And those of you thinking of joining who have a family, seriously consider that. All these calculations have not included income from benefits, should you be on any of those. I find it hard to sympathise with these singlies who are broke at the end of the month due to their own poor consumer choices. There are people out there actually struggling to get by, not able to feed their children or skipping meals so their kids can eat, having to keep the lights and heating off, working multiple jobs and so on. I just feel it's so disingenuous to suggest that the pay is shit when you are better off than nearly half of the UK population. I'm hoping this has provided some much needed perspective for some of you. For those of you living in the block without significant financial obligations at this time, consider this. If you are barely managing to get by and have no savings at the end of each month, how the f*** will you cope when you eventually move into service family accommodation, or your own place with a mortgage, or when you have children? If you struggle to handle your finances now with minimal expenses and responsibilities, you are not adequately prepared to start a family or become a homeowner. You will not be able to remain living the same lifestyle you did as a single carefree person once you start taking on those extra financial responsibilities, unless you substantially increase your income as those obligations occur, which is highly unlikely. And nor should your employer increase your pay because you chose to make those decisions. Now, if you happen to be one of these individuals, don't worry, I've got you covered. I understand that you probably weren't educated on personal finance growing up, and perhaps the way money was handled in your family has influenced your decisions today. But don't allow those circumstances define you. You can change, and for the better. This channel has a plethora of videos that can help teach you the basics of personal finance and set you up for financial success in life. So check them out, they seriously could help you. It is important for people to take responsibility for their actions. Whilst pay is certainly a valid factor for some people leaving, I think that if we were actually able to scrutinise the expenses of those who say the pay is shit, we would probably find that the problem actually lies with the individual and their consumer habits rather than the amount of pay they receive. As mentioned before, this is not a one-size-fits-all situation. There are certainly cases where the pay is insufficient for individuals in their circumstances, and leaving might be the right choice for them, provided they have a solid plan in place and have thoroughly assessed their financial situation. However, it's equally important to acknowledge that many people's actions, rather than their pay, contribute to their financial difficulties. Many people mentioned about how public sector pay has fallen behind the private sector, and if you look at this chart, it corroborates that point. There are pros and cons that come with working in each of these sectors. The opportunities to make more money are in the private sector, but job security is more at risk, while with the public sector, negotiation of pay and the amount is less, but jobs are far more secure and stable. It's down to the individual to weigh up those pros and cons and make a decision that best suits them. But remember, When the plague hit and lockdowns were in full swing, public sector pay was higher than that of private sector. While people were losing their jobs left and right or stuck on furlough, us lucky ducks in the public sector were still getting a fat paycheck, and depending on your job, you could have been paid to chill at home for a couple of months. I know there are a few of you out there. I'll cover more about the pros and cons and the differences between being paid at an hourly rate compared to a salary in my video where I explain how we are paid more than minimum wage. I use factual, statistical and legal evidence to back up my statement. I will link it below. It's a real eye-opener, especially for those intellectually challenged souls who think dividing the salary by the number of hours in a year is all the math they need. There are, of course, much higher paid jobs in the private sector, there's no doubt about that, but many of these require skill and qualifications to enter at that higher paid level. Joe Blogg's leaving the infantry after 4 years because he thinks the pay is not going into a 50k a year job straight away. However, if Joe served a bit longer and used the armed forces to do courses and get certain qualifications that are available to him, then it is much more likely he could do that. Use the military as your personal education and development centre. Resettlement starts on your first day of service. Milk the military for all it can offer, and it does offer a lot. Then use those newfound skills and qualifications to negotiate a great job on Civvy Street. Don't just leave because you aren't happy with the pay without giving serious thought to what you are actually going to do when you leave. What job have you got lined up? How much does it pay? Is it enough to sustain your current lifestyle, or will you have to cut back? Is the pay enough to support your family? Where will you live? How much does that cost? And so on. These are questions you need to be asking yourself before you even sign off. I've had a look at my equivalent jobs on Civvy Street, and the salaries are not as much as I am paid now. But to be fair, with my trade, freelance is where the money is. However, freelance can have huge fluctuations and requires a good network for secure work. But if a plague-like situation were to happen again, and there is no requirement for freelancers of my trade, then I'm a bit f***ed if I haven't sorted my emergency fund out. Coming in at 80%, job security is the main reason for people staying in the armed forces. I think that aspect of the job is often overlooked. People also mentioned our pay not keeping up with inflation and the cost of living crisis. Both absolutely valid points and are affecting everyone, not just us in the armed forces. Although I might just add, leaving a safe and secure job during a cost of living crisis may not be the best decision unless you absolutely have a solid exit plan. Whilst private sector pay rises were higher than ours, they were still not in line with inflation. And remember, we are publicly funded. Where will our pay rise come from? Are they going to raise taxes so the whole public sector can get a rise in line with inflation? Probably not. So what happens then? The rises come from the already allocated budget, which then means cuts in other areas like training, education, welfare, AT, etc. So we were never going to get an 11% pay rise. Sorry if that comes to a shock to some of you. On the other hand, employees in the private sector often receive pay rises and bonuses based on the profits their companies make, and many companies have been raking in record profits over the past couple of years. That's why they can dish out higher pay rises to their employees. So yeah, there are pros and cons to both sectors. The cost of living crisis is affecting everyone. Everything is much more expensive than it was 2 years ago. If you didn't know, most units and corps have a benevolence fund that soldiers can pay into each month. If you are seriously struggling, then reach out to them, they can help. It can be used for all sorts, AT, education, financial aid, welfare, etc. I will link below a very well produced piece by the RLC in which it shows a handful of people who have benefited from the scheme to help give you an idea of what it can be used for. Speaking from my own experience with the cost of living skyrocketing, I've had to reassess my budget. I've trimmed down on my wants because, let's face it, my needs are now more expensive. And you should do the same. As things get pricier and our pay struggles to keep up, an issue not unique to the armed forces, we have to make cuts to our lifestyle in order to live within our means. Going into debt just to maintain a lifestyle you can no longer afford is just asking for trouble later down the line. I will link below a video I've created where I show you how to create a budget, and you can also download a spreadsheet for free. It's times like these where being able to manage your money correctly pays dividends. Pay is always a hot button issue, and it's not limited to the armed forces. However, when we consider everything in perspective, in my opinion, we are actually paid well. It's genuinely frustrating to see people complain about their pay being terrible while they have minimal expenses and plenty of disposable income. Meanwhile, there are individuals out there who are struggling to make ends meet and are living below the poverty line. I've covered a lot about pay, and my hope is that it has at least made you think and see a different perspective. Whether you agree or disagree, or even if my words have made you melt a bit, I encourage you to leave your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely value hearing your opinions. Of course, I understand that not everything I've said will apply to everyone, nor is it intended to. I don't dismiss the fact that pay is a significant factor when it comes to leaving the armed forces. It certainly is. However, I do believe that some people are not being entirely honest with themselves when it comes to their own lifestyle choices and spending habits, which directly impacts their income and standard of living. Remember, it's easier to lower your expenses than it is to increase your income. So take a moment to evaluate your budget and see if there are any areas where you can make adjustments. It might surprise you how small changes can make a big difference in managing your finances effectively. After that long old slog, let's talk about the concern coming in at 20.5%, the lack of or reduction in incentives. It's true that we have witnessed a decline in incentives and retention bonuses that were once available to us. The commitment bonus is a thing of the past, and the pension scheme has undergone a couple of changes over the last few decades, and not necessarily for the better. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if we see another change to the pension scheme during my time in service. However, it's important to note that despite not being as generous as the 75 scheme, the AFPS 15 is still a remarkable scheme. In fact, it's one of the best pension schemes out there, even when compared to other public sector schemes that have also experienced reductions. Many people, like with pay, say the pension is shit, but then when you actually quiz them on the pension, they know absolutely all about it. All they know is that the 15 is not as good as the 75, so therefore it must be shit. But don't worry, you're in luck. I have a whole playlist on the Armed Forces pensions which I have linked below, so the resources are there for you to educate yourself on how good the schemes actually are. So whilst the reduction is true, there are still a number of incentive and retention options available to us in the military. I'm going to list off a bunch here, but I won't be going into detail in this video as it's getting long enough as it is. I'll do separate videos on some of those at a later date. So off the top of my head, we have the Forces Help to Buy scheme, the early departure payment, the resettlement grant, enhanced learning credits, full resettlement entitlements, the non-contributory pension, standard learning credits, wraparound childcare, free healthcare and welfare support, flexible working hours, flexible service, adventure training, sports, apprenticeship, subsidised accommodation, no utility bills for those in SLA, paid annual and sick leave, which includes maternity, paternity and adoption. This list is not exhaustive and not all of these options will apply to everyone. And yes, while some of these options are also available in Civvy Street, it's not always to the extent as it is in the armed forces. It's unfortunate that cuts have to be made, but understand there are still many benefits, incentives and retention tools unique to the armed forces. I would agree that widespread knowledge of them is an issue that could be addressed, and Discover My Benefits can help. It allows you to input your details and will show you many of the benefits you could be claiming. Give it a shot, it might help. Coming in at third at 18.2% of responses with poor management and leadership being a factor for people leaving, and I 100% agree with this. A number of my friends have left because of the poor management they experienced, and poor leadership can have a spiralling effect. The RSM in my old unit underscored the importance of strong leadership in retaining skilled and capable individuals. He mentioned how if many such individuals are leaving due to poor leadership, then when promotions become available, there may be a lack of high-quality candidates. Consequently, lesser qualified individuals may be promoted, perpetuating a cycle of subpar leadership and staff attrition. This is not to say if you promote, you are not a top-tier soldier. Poor management is a minority of people, but their effect has a big impact, especially if they sit high up the pecking order. Many competent and good leaders stay in and go far, but even they can be hindered by those above them. Unfortunately, people are often promoted into incompetency. Leadership can come very hard to people. You don't just wake up after being promoted with all the knowledge you require to be a good manager. It requires some self-development. The onus is on you to do it, and you owe it to your team to be competent at the job you are employed to do. Do this by reading books, listening to podcasts, studying previous successful leaders, finding a role model within work, learning as much on the job before you get promoted, and continue to do so once you are in that new position. And don't be afraid to ask for help. A few books I have read which have helped me are Not Everyone Gets a Trophy by Bruce Tolgan, Start With Why and Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek. There are plenty more out there, and the Centre for Army Leadership is also a great resource to improve on your management skills. Link for these will be below. Effective leadership is crucial in any team or organisation. Your decisions and actions as a leader have a direct impact on the lives and work of your team. To ensure a positive and productive environment, it's important to listen to your team and leverage their strengths. Keep an open mind and be receptive to suggestions, even if they challenge your own thinking. Don't let your ego and personal feelings get in the way of making objective decisions for the benefit of the team. Equally though, if you're in a position where you need to make suggestions to your chain of command, it's important to approach it with respect and professionalism. Being disrespectful or confrontational is unlikely to achieve the desired outcome. And to be fair, the military nowadays is a lot more receptive to feedback than it used to be. What the armed forces also need to understand though is that if you can't fire your employees, then they don't work for you, you work for them. And it seems, from my experience, the armed forces are more focused on how the numbers look than the actual quality of the individuals that serve. The bureaucracy required to get rid of completely incompetent people is bloody ridiculous. But talking with other people, this is also a problem in Civvy Street too. At the end of the day, unless the root cause of the management problem is addressed, similar issues will continue to arise as those individuals go up the ranks. By proactively working to address poor management practices, then you may be able to develop skills and experience in handling challenging workplace situations, which can be valuable in future ranks, which in turn will help retention. Next up is work-life balance, coming in at 12.9% of responses. According to the AFCAS, 45% of serving personnel are able to maintain a balance between their work and personal life, meaning 55% are not able to do that, and currently in the post that I am in, I fall into the latter category. This is my own anecdotal experience, but I imagine many people do feel the same way. When I joined, I was single and happy to get away from home and start a new journey. I had pretty much no responsibilities at all, and the work-life balance didn't really affect me then. Fast forward to getting married, having a kid, and now having much more purpose and responsibility in my life, I certainly find the work-life balance much more of a factor that affects my relationships. So I completely understand that people want to leave because they want more structured life that they can plan around and not have to worry about if they're working weekends or getting dicked last minute to fill in for someone on exercise, etc. However, the work-life balance is a complex issue, as the nature of serving in the armed forces often requires significant sacrifices, and so that can make it challenging to maintain a healthy balance between work and personal life. Efforts have been made to improve the work-life balance of military personnel and their families, like wraparound childcare and flexible working, but there are certain aspects that make it unlikely that significant changes will be possible. After all, it's the nature of the job. The military will never be like a 9-to-5 civvy job all the time. We are, after all, public servants, and an important aspect of being a public servant is a focus on serving the public. Unlike private sector jobs, which are often driven by profit and self-interest, public servants are dedicated to working for the benefit of others. Of course, as one's career progresses and their family grows, priorities begin to change, and the sense of purpose they may have had serving in the armed forces now switches to their family. It's a natural progression. If obligations within the service began having too much of an effect on my personal life, then I would leave too. The chain of command should do everything in their power to alleviate the work-life balance issue for their personnel, but even then there is only so much they can do. But also, individuals need to understand that by serving in the armed forces, there is an element of personal sacrifice that has to be made. I mean, we serve in the armed forces. We are serving personnel. That word alone signifies a commitment to support others and prioritise the interests of the community and country over personal gain. If that level of sacrifice is not for you, then for sure, it might be time to leave, or don't even bother signing up. As I said, it's a complex issue. There are certainly things that can be done to help support service families and ensuring that service personnel have the resources they need to maintain a healthy work-life balance, but only to the extent that it is possible within the constraints of military service. And coming in at 10.7% is workload. And going back to the 2022 AFCAS, 44% of serving personnel state that their workload is the main reason they are unable to take all their annual leave, which I can definitely relate to. I can't remember the last time I used all my leave days. It certainly does feel at times the workload is never ending, that the military is getting smaller but our commitments remain the same, a problem in and of itself. But to continue to play devil's advocate here and try and put a positive spin, a heavy workload can be a sign that a job is both challenging and rewarding. Jobs that require significant effort and dedication can often provide opportunities for growth and advancement, as well as a sense of accomplishment and pride in one's work. Very few people in life get to the top by not working hard and having a small workload. Licking assholes will only get you so far. In my current role, there are a lot of times where my workload has been substantial, and whilst it may get stressful, I still manage to get it done and come out on the other side having improved in some way or another, both personally and professionally. At the end of the day, if it doesn't challenge you, then it doesn't change you. So while it is understandable that you may become frustrated by having a heavy workload, quitting a job solely due to workload concerns may not always be the best option. By proactively addressing these concerns with the chain of command and exploring other solutions, you may be able to find ways to manage your workload and continue to grow and develop within your current role. Yes, this will depend on a willing and competent leadership, but don't just dismiss the idea of raising these issues with your chain of command because you think they will not listen. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take, and how are things supposed to improve and the shortcomings be brought to light for them to then improve upon if you just fester in resentment about the whole situation? Before I finish up, I do want to comment on a few points that are stuck in the other category. So first up is nothing to do in Civvy Street is more pay, less work. This individual appears to want to be paid more for doing less than nothing. Wouldn't that be lovely? But alas, that's not really how the employment market works, although I am guessing they probably meant a lack of operations, etc. is a factor for people leaving. It certainly could be, and it could also be a factor for people not joining perhaps. This response says, the fact that when you hear your mate's success stories and what it's actually like on the other side. Be aware of survivor bias. You'll always hear of the success stories, but it's rare people will brag about their failings and how they are now worse off. There are certainly people who have left and are doing much better, but don't let that fool you. Just because they are doing well doesn't mean you will. Past performance is not indicative of future success. Next up is teamwork generation. Not gonna lie, I've managed to dodge both teamwork days as I've been deployed, so I can't really comment as I wasn't involved with these days or what they entailed. Let me know in the comments though, what are your thoughts on teamwork? This one says, don't like to work for a living, don't like being told what to do, generational thing. There is certainly a generational factor, but the military does need to change with the times. The way things used to be done just won't work with my generation and the ones that have come after me. So organisations and leaders do need to change to continue to recruit and retain people. The book I mentioned earlier, Not Everyone Gets a Trophy, talks about how the older generations need to learn how to manage the younger generations in the workplace, but equally how the younger generations need to understand that things don't happen at the click of a button, and to get places in life you actually need to work for it, as your parents aren't there to do it for you. Times are changing, and to remain an attractive employer, organisations must change too. The military has changed in many positive ways in the last decade or so, but it has also taken things a bit too far in certain areas, which leads me on to this next point. It's become very woke. The woke mind virus has certainly infected the military as it has across many organisations in the Western world. Sadly, as a serving soldier, I'm very limited with what I can say on such a public forum on this topic, which is the issue, as it stifles debate and has allowed such a virus to infect people because many issues go unchallenged by people out of fear of being cancelled, fired, or their reputation being irreversibly damaged. There is a saying, go woke, go broke, and we are seeing this with many organisations who are pandering to the loud minority, thinking that they speak for the silenced majority. Anyway, I recommend reading a couple of great books by Vivek Ramaswamy called Woke Inc. and Nation of Victims. I'll link them below. And lastly, this one says, in my opinion, grass is greener syndrome. Sometimes they don't know how good they have it, but that doesn't mean they aren't getting f***ed about or treated like shit. To some, the grass is always greener and nothing will ever be enough for them. It is true that the grass can be greener, but it tends to only be greener for those who actually plant the seeds. I transferred a few years ago and I've never looked back at my old job. The grass is much greener for me now. I've been to so many places and seen so many different aspects of the military, and I've had so many unique opportunities that I wouldn't have had otherwise in the bubble that was my old unit. But that didn't happen overnight. I started laying the foundations for a successful transfer a year or so before I did it. I would spend my evenings learning new skills and improving on them, which would then make me more attractive to the trade I was trying to join. The grass can be greener on Civvy Street too, but use your time in the military to plant those seeds. Also, just because I've transferred doesn't mean I've stopped planting those seeds either. So there are my counterpoints to the responses I received. As I said earlier, the decision to leave the military is often multifaceted, and different individuals may have a unique combination of factors influencing their choices. For some, it may be a combination of pay, work-life balance, and limited career progression, while for others it could be primarily driven by the desire for new challenges and opportunities outside of military life. I'm not dismissing these as valid reasons for why people are leaving, I'm just adding extra context and perspective to the points raised in the hopes you leave this video more informed than when you started. The more you know, the better quality the decisions you make. If you've made it this far, then thank you for sticking around. I think this is probably my longest video yet. Hopefully you have found some value in what I've said and presented. Are you more informed now? Do you think the pay is shit? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you all for watching. If you liked what you just saw, please hit the subscribe button up there. And if you want to see some more videos, click over there. See you soon.